Chapter 29. The other children go home. We must go down and take a look at our little friends before we do anything else, said Mr. Wonka. He pushed a different button and the elevator dropped lower, and soon it was hovering just above the entrance gates to the factory. Looking down now, Charlie could see the children and their parents standing in the little group just inside the gates. I can only see 3, he said. Who's missing? I expect it's Mike TV, Mr. Wonka said, but he'll be coming along soon. Do you see the trucks? Mr. Wonka pointed to a line of gigantic covered vans in a line nearby. Yes, said Charlie. What are they for? Don't you remember what it said on every golden ticket? Every child goes home with a lifetime supply of candy. And there's a truckload for each of them, loaded to the brim. Aha! Mr. Wonka said, there goes Augustus Gloop. Do you see him? He's getting in the first truck with his mother and his father. You mean he's really all right? Asked Charlie, astonished, even after going through that pipe. He's very much all right, said Mr. Wonka. He's changed, said Grandpa Joe, peering down through the window. He used to be fat, and now he's as thin as a straw. Of course he's changed, said Mr. Wonka, laughing. He got squeezed into a pipe, don't you remember? And look there goes Mrs. Violet Beauregard, the great gum chewer. It's as though they managed to de-juice her. After all, I'm so glad, and look at how healthy she looks. Much better than before. But she's purple in the face, said Grandpa Joe. So she is, said Mr. Wonka. Ah, well, there's nothing we can do about that. Good gracious, said Charlie. Look at poor Veruca Salt and Mr. and Mrs. Salt. They are simply covered with garbage. And here comes Mike TV, said Grandpa. Good heavens, what have they done with him? He is about 10 feet tall and as thin as a wire. They've overstretched him on the gum-stretching machine, said Mr. Wonka. How careless. How dreadful for him, said Charlie. And here are all the people leaving. We have Mike TV, covered in garbage, purple, and Augustus. Nonsense, said Mr. Wonka. He's very lucky. Every basketball in the country will be trying to get him. But now, he said, it is time we left these 4 silly children. I have something very important to talk to you about, my dear Charlie. Mr. Wonka pushed another button and the elevator swung upwards into the sky. Chapter 30. Charlie's Chocolate Factory. The great glass elevator was now hovering high over the town. Inside the elevator stood Mr. Wonka, Grandpa Joe, and little Charlie. How I love my chocolate factory, said Mr. Wonka, gazing down. Then he paused and he turned around to look at Charlie. Do you love it too, Charlie? He asked. Oh, yes, said Charlie. I think it's the most wonderful place in the world. I am pleased to hear you say that, said Mr. Wonka, looking more serious than ever. Yes, he said, I am very pleased indeed to hear you say that, and I shall now tell you why. Wonka cocked his head to one side, and all at once, tiny twinkling wrinkles of a smile appeared on the corners of his eyes. You see, my dear boy, I have decided to make you a present of the whole place. As soon as you are old enough to run it, the entire factory will become yours. Charlie stared at Mr. Wonka. Grandpa Joe opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. It's quite true, Mr. Wonka said, smiling. I'm really giving it to you. That's all right, isn't it? Giving it to him, gasped Grandpa Joe. You must be joking. I'm not joking. I'm deadly serious, said Mr. Wonka. But why would you want to give your factory to little Charlie? Asked Grandpa Joe. Listen, Mr. Wonka said, I am an old man. I'm much older than you think. I can't go on forever. I've got no children of my own, no family at all. So who is going to run the factory when I get too old to do it myself? Someone's got to keep it going, if only for the sake of the Oompa Loompas. Mind you, there are thousands of clever men who would give anything for the chance to come and take over for me. But I don't want that sort of person. I don't want a grown-up person at all. A grown-up won't listen to me. He won't learn. He will try to do things his own way and not mine. So I have to have a child. I want a good, sensible, loving child, to one whom I can tell all my most precious secrets. And while I'm still alive. So that's why you sent out the golden tickets, cried Charlie. Exactly, said Mr. Wonka. I decided to invite 5 children to the factory, and the one I liked best at the end of the day would be the winner. But Mr. Wonka, said Grandpa Joe, do you really think that you're giving all of this enormous factory to little Charlie after all? There's no time for arguments, said Mr. Wonka. We must go at once and fetch the rest of the family. Charlie's father and mother and anyone else that's around. They can live in the factory from now on. They can all help run it until Charlie is old enough to live by himself. Where do you live, Charlie? Charlie peered down in the glass elevator at the snow-covered houses that lay below. It's that little cottage right at the edge of the town, the tiny little one. I see it, said Mr. Wonka, and he pushed some more buttons. The elevator shot down towards Charlie's house. I'm afraid my mother won't come with us, said Charlie. Why not? Because she won't leave Grandma Josephine and Grandma Georgina and Grandpa George. But they must come too, said Mr. Wonka. They can't, said Charlie. They're very old and they haven't been out of bed for 20 years. Then we'll take the bed with us, said Mr. Wonka. There's plenty of room in this elevator for a bed. You could get that bed out of the house. It wouldn't go through the door. You mustn't despair, said Mr. Wonka. Nothing is impossible. You watch. The elevator was hovering over the roof of the little Bucket's house. What are you going to do? Cried Charlie. I'm going to go fetch them, said Mr. Wonka. How? Said Grandpa Joe. Through the roof, said Mr. Wonka. No, said Charlie. Stop, said Grandpa Joe. Crash went the elevator right through the roof of the house into the old people's bedroom. Showers of dust and broken tiles and bits of woods and cockroaches and spiders and bricks and cement went raining onto the three old ones who were laying in bed. Each of them thought that a world had come to an end. Grandma Georgina fainted. Grandma Josephine dropped her false teeth. Grandpa George put his head under the blanket, and Mr. and Mrs. Bucket came rushing in. Save us! Cried Grandma Josephine. Calm yourself, my dear wife. It's only us. Mother, said Charlie. Mother, listen what's happening. We're all going to go live in Mr. Wonka's factory. We're going to help him run it, and he's going to invite all to meet in. What are you talking about? Said Mrs. Bucket. Just look at the house, said Mr. Bucket. It's in ruins. My dear sir, said Mr. Wonka, jumping forward, I'm so very glad to meet you. You mustn't worry about the house. From now on, you're never going to need it again. Who is this crazy man? Asked Georgina. Grandma Georgina. He could have killed us all. This, said Grandpa Joe, is Mr. Willy Wonka himself. It took quite a time for Grandma Joe and Charlie to explain to everyone what had happened. I'd rather die in my bed, said Josephine, than ride in the elevator. So would I, said Grandma Georgina. I refuse to go, said Grandpa George. So Mr. Wonka and Grandpa Joe and Charlie, taking no notice of their screams, simply pushed the bed into the elevator. They pushed Mr. and Mrs. Bucket in after, and then they got in themselves. Mr. Wonka pushed a button, the doors closed, and Grandma Georgina screamed. And the elevator rose up and shot through the hole in the roof out to the open sky. Charlie climbed on the bed and tried to calm the three old people who were still petrified with fear. It's quite safe, he said. We're going to the most wonderful place in the world. Charlie's right, said Grandpa Joe. Will there be anything to eat while I'm there? I'm starving. The whole family is starving. Anything to eat, cried Charlie, laughing. Oh, you just wait and see. And that is the end of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Thanks for listening.